J'ai le bonheur et l'honneur de vous présenter en première intervention Dan Jones. Dan est mon mentor depuis mon premier livre, qui est le Goldmine, il y a maintenant plus de 10 ans. Dan est vraiment un des fondateurs du Lean parce qu'il est un des co-auteurs du premier livre qui a découvert au monde Toyota, qui s'appelle en français « Le système qui va changer le monde ». Donc il a fait partie de l'équipe de MIT qui a été voir... Ils ont fait un benchmark de toutes les usines automobiles du monde et ils se sont rendus compte que Toyota n'était pas meilleur sur quelques dimensions, mais sur toutes les dimensions. Et ils voulaient à l'époque... ils ont cherché un nom. Vous savez quel était le premier nom qu'ils avaient trouvé pour le Lean? La production fragile. Pourquoi fragile? Quelqu'un? Parce que ça s'arrête. Il y a un problème, ça s'arrête. Bon, ils se sont dit que ce n'était peut-être pas vendeur. Et un de leurs étudiants, c'était Krafschick, non, c'est ça?
Oui.
A eu l'idée géniale d'appeler ça Lean, ce qui est une idée géniale parce que ça a été un branding formidable pour une raison simple, c'est que ça ne se traduit en aucune langue au monde. En anglais, Lean, on sait ce que ça veut dire le Greyhound. Vous voyez le lévrier? C'est agile, c'est svelte, ça court, c'est ça que ça veut dire. Mais le mot n'existe en aucun moment, donc par accident, ils ont créé une marque mondiale. Et l'étape d'après, c'est qu'avec Jim Womack, ils ont écrit le livre Lean Thinking, Système Lean, qui est vraiment l'ouvrage fondateur, je crois, du mouvement, à partir duquel le mouvement Lean s'est développé. Donc, au-delà de connaître le Lean de l'intérieur pour l'avoir créé, Dan a une autre caractéristique extraordinaire, c'est qu'il a toujours été un pionnier pour repousser les barrières du Lean, pour aller dans des zones où on n'avait pas été jusqu'à présent. Donc, Dan a été le premier à faire du Lean dans la grande distribution avec Tesco. Donc, le premier à nous sortir de l'usine a été Dan avec Tesco. L'étape d'avant, récemment, il a été le pionnier du Lean dans la santé, avec Lean Healthcare. Et là, on a un peu une première, parce qu'on va voir ses travaux sur une nouvelle frontière du Lean, qui est le Lean et le digital. Et je pense que c'est vraiment important, parce qu'en ce moment, les deux grands changements, je vois moi dans l'entreprise, d'un côté, les deux grandes innovations, d'une part, il y a le Lean d'un côté et le digital de l'autre. Donc là, Dan va partager avec nous ses réflexions sur Lean et digital. C'est en anglais, mais je pense que vous allez voir, c'est très clair, vous pourrez le suivre sans difficulté. Est-ce que vous pouvez accueillir Dan Jones? Dan Jones, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Well, good morning and congratulations, Institute Lean France, for another packed summit. I have to say, I'm always surprised how resilient Lean is in France, because France is not the ideal country to do Lean in. It's quite a tough environment. And yet, actually, some of the most interesting things are happening in France in the Lean movement. And wherever we are pushing against the frontiers of our current knowledge of Lean, it's collaboration with Michael that gets us experimental sites and opportunities to test these ideas out in principle. So it's very interesting to follow the development of Lean in France, and I'm very pleased to contribute some thoughts that might provoke you to think about the digital world in a slightly different way. Because I'm a great enthusiast for all things digital. I'm completely incapable of using most of those things. And my technical support left home many years ago. My children are now grown up and working for startups and working for consulting companies and so on and so forth. So they're all totally digital Lean, and they come home and say, "Oh, Dad, you know, you've really got to do this, that, and the other." And I think it's great. And I say, this is up to you guys to figure out how you use this digital stuff. I think it's terrifically important. On the other hand, how do we really make sense of the contribution that digital can make to our lives and our work, from a lean perspective. And I've been figuring this out and thinking about it for a long time. I've attended all of the Lean IT summits in Paris that Marie-Pierre's organized, and they have given us a very unique window on the different pioneers who've been experimenting with lean in software development and lean in IT. And that has been one of the most productive learning experiences that have prompted my thinking about digital. So, I don't claim to be a digital expert, and I don't claim that my insights into the digital world are going to be any more valid than yours. But at least I'm bringing the lean thinking framework to bear on these questions, and maybe together we can figure out a better way of translating the real opportunities from digital into real results for our societies. Beyond, and make sense of the hype that it's currently the way that these opportunities are described to us. So I just want to leave you with a few challenging thoughts today. I'm not claiming that those thoughts are any more than current observations about the dilemmas that we all face. So this is where we've all been working. We've been working in the legacies of the mass production age. Big manufacturing operations, big distribution operations, retail operations, healthcare operations, service operations. They've all been legacies of the age when economies of scale and big capital assets plus control of markets was the key. And I can imagine that in the future, these are going to change quite fundamentally. And I think these are the legacies of the mass production age, and they will be around with us for a long time. But gradually, we will, I think, discover there are better alternatives. Already in some sectors, we are seeing technologies that enable what is, I believe, the natural outcome of lean is distributed manufacturing. Manufacturing in smaller volumes, much closer to markets. And we're beginning to see that. And 3D printing, of course, is one of the technologies that will contribute to that. So I think we're going to see a move away from big centralized production facilities. Not for everything, but for many things, particularly for simpler things that we can make to demand. I can absolutely see, as we digest the lessons from lean in distribution, that we can move away from huge warehouses, distribution centers, as we compress and create just-in-time production and opportunities to link production with sales. We actually don't need a tremendous amount of inventory carrying space and management issues to manage that inventory. I think we're going to see compressed supply chains in the future. And that's a very different future that I think is coming. And one of the things that's happening, of course, is that already in the retail space, the internet is fundamentally changing how we shop and how we look for things and how we get things. And it's not just home shopping, but it's also local convenience stores and pick-up points, click and collect, all kinds of different ways that is now significantly undermining the economic viability of these huge mega stores that were pioneered in France by people like Carrefour. I think also, and even in healthcare, we're going to move away from the huge, big, capital-intensive district hospitals to more distributed facilities. So those are my hunches, based upon my reading of the ultimate logic of lean, is that I think we will be creating a very different infrastructure in 10 or 15 years' time to the current infrastructure. So it's everywhere. And it changes everything, but does it? And I don't think it changes everything as fast as everybody thinks, because let's just look at a few examples. There's no question that electronic media is fundamentally changing the whole media business, how we access news and information. But it's also interesting that e-books have plateaued now at 30% of the market, about 30% of the market in every country. So the share of e-books in total book sales is kind of plateaued. So it's actually turning out to be an alternative channel and not a complete substitute. And that's kind of interesting. And as I've said already in retailing, home shopping plus click and collect plus the integration of convenience stores with home shopping and so on, all of those things are changing the retail world away from the big retailers to more like the people like Amazon and DHL and so on, who are controlling the last mile distribution and organizing production in a fundamentally different way. So retail is changing as we speak. Mobility is changing. How we actually organize our travel, there's no question that's changing, and I think for the good. What's still got to change, and is going to change, I believe, in the next few years, is money. Is the whole way in which money transactions, plus all the banking services and so on, I think that's going to fundamentally change. And a good thing too. It's about time. And healthcare is obviously one of the frontiers of the future. At the moment, doctors guard the health record, their control over my information on my health very, very tightly. And I can't actually even get access to my health records. I can see it in the doctor's surgery, but I can't yet access it. And so I can't yet be a really intelligent player. Partly I don't know what to do with the records, but I could learn. And partly it simply is the record of occasional visits to the doctor rather than a record of my continuing health. So I think that whole frontier of the information exchange and co-management of medical conditions and so on, I think that's all going to fundamentally change. So on the one hand, you have books like The Digital Age, which spell out the hype of how everything's going to change tomorrow and everything's going to be digital and everything's going to be connected. And it's kind of interesting. It's actually exhausting when you read the book. A more interesting book is The Second Machine Age, which takes a more calm and collected view from a technology perspective of the opportunities that the internet and digital connectivity bring out. And from that book, it's very clear that they have expertise, both of these books have expertise from the technology perspective, but actually the technological opportunities are only one piece of the story. The second piece of the story, of course, is the things that are slowing down the adoption of these technical opportunities. And that, on the one hand, is consumer acceptance. Consumers have gradually got to change the way they run their lives to incorporate these new opportunities. But much more significantly is the organization structures that we have today are not compatible, in most cases, with exploiting these technical opportunities. And if you read these books, they clearly have almost no idea at all about how conventional business makes change. A reference in The Second Machine Age, which is a great book, to the fact that the CEO will adopt a new strategy, a digital strategy, and you see lots and lots of papers now on this, a digital strategy which will be imposed through the organization. Well, how much have we learned about strategies that are imposed from the top with actually no attention paid to how those strategies are going to be implemented and what the actions are that would close the gaps that would achieve that? So this is dreaming, and yet it's a major, major constraint. And I believe the thing that will slow the digital age down is not just the speed of innovation, but is the ability to develop different organizational forms that don't support the legacies of the mass production age, but that support the new capabilities in a connected world. And my contention is that the old management systems that we have lived with and are fighting against in many cases, and I will talk a bit more about, they're the obstacle. So management is essentially, senior management, particularly headquarters, is the biggest obstacle that we actually face to the digital world. It's not where the digital world is going to be implemented. And so lean is not another organizational form. It isn't another blueprint that we can replace traditional management with, but it's a different way of thinking that builds a much more adaptive workforce, responsive to user needs, that actually will build the organization structure of the future. They will look very different. We can't quite yet see what those organizational forms will be, and there will be a lot of experimentation necessary to discover those. But the thinking underlying them, I think, will come from lean. So that is where lean can make the biggest contribution, is linking the needs of the user with the design of the service or the product and the delivery of the product and service by a very different form of organization. So it's the thought process that is fundamentally different to the thought process of traditional management. So, what are the signs of this digital revolution taking place? Well, the signs are not very clear yet. I don't know if you follow, but there's a big debate amongst economists trying to explain the apparent productivity slowdown in all of the Western countries for at least since the crisis, but actually over the last 20 years. What has been the cause of the slowdown in productivity, which of course is what generates the wealth to increase our living standards? What has caused that productivity slowdown? Is it a slowdown of innovation, which I don't believe it is? Is it that our societies are adapting to economic crises in different ways? And that may be part of the story. And we know from our experience that there are plenty of opportunities to make really dramatic productivity gains using lean. But actually, it's very difficult to see those at a macro sense. And look for the outcome of the huge investment in IT that many firms have done in order to improve their command and control of their operations, big SAP systems and so on. These things have not shown up in terms of productivity. So there's a big dilemma, and I think the productivity dilemma signals that actually we're reaching a point of diminishing returns from the current management model, and I'll comment more on that. Second thing to give us pause is that the record of successful IT projects, now lots of good studies of this, are extremely poor. Some 40% of those projects were delivered on time and on budget. 20% of those projects were never completed at all. Some, like the huge, great IT project for the National Health Service in the UK, which was completely abandoned, have wasted billions and billions and billions of pounds. And not only have they not been successful, only 20% of the features that were built into those systems are ever used by the recipients. And I've seen time and time again the techies in one side of the room designing systems for the operations folks and the rest of in the other side of the room that simply don't work because they're operating in different worlds with different equipment. And so you get a stream of tickets passed back to the designers who can't really be bothered to solve those or don't really want to solve those. They want to go on to the next shiny thing. So we got a big problem with the way we think about the use of IT. And the truth is, we've been thinking about IT as a way of improving command and control over traditional mass production organizations. And we've simply been trying to automate, to improve command and control with very little results. The third thing we have to face is that true lean transformations that are sustained company-wide, not just individual plants. We've seen lots and lots and lots of isolated examples of good lean improvements, and I'm sure many of those you are responsible for. But at a total corporate level, still, we haven't seen as many as we expected to see. And we can all point to the few examples. And I think it has to do with the point that Michael was just making, is that we've been seeing lean as an operation, a tool for improving the effectiveness and efficiency of operations, rather than seeing lean as a strategy for developing a completely different way of serving the customer. So that's interesting and poses us a challenge to think about. But my answer to all of these is that I think we are reaching the end of what is possible with the traditional command and control, central allocation of the resources, forcing everybody through targets to figure out how to achieve those objectives, and basically how to utilize those assets. The traditional GE command and control model, I think, is now reaching the end of its life. And I think that's the problem behind all of these slowdowns. And so management is not only the problem in terms of exploiting the technical opportunities of the technology, as I was talking about before, it's actually management, Western management, is now the problem in terms of improving the effectiveness of our economies. So really management is the issue. And the thing that fundamentally separates lean from the technologist approach, which is the enthusiasm for technology, will just drive everybody to eventually accept it willy-nilly. Lean is about, instead of trying to automate people out of the system and design people as factories and people driverless cars, if you like, lean is about people. And lean is about not only physical operations and information and knowledge, but it's about building systems that enhance and enable human decision making. So it's all about people systems. So lean starts from the premise that technology is an enabling mechanism to help humans work together more effectively, rather than a means of displacing humans. And that tension will always exist, but that's the counterpoint that lean can provide. And that's interesting. At the moment, there's a very active debate going on amongst the driverless car folks, the Google folks, actually led by John Krafcik, the founder of the term lean, who's now the head of Google's car project, desperately trying to develop completely autonomous vehicles. Toyota has always taken a very different perspective. They are exploring technically how to assist drivers. So it's about assisting drivers rather than replacing drivers. And that debate has been going on in the space community, in the submarine community, in the aerospace community, about driverless versus autonomy versus assist. And that debate is a very, very important debate that we will need to think about. So, lean is essentially building systems around people and human decision makers. Now, just to get that back in perspective, it's very helpful to go back to actually thinking about what Toyota's original purpose was. After the war, they'd been an innovator in loom technology. They had no money. They'd been through a strike that nearly crippled the company, and determined the management at the time that they would not build a system that depended on firing people. They also made a decision that they would no longer depend on banks, and they would not borrow lots of money to buy all the equipment to build a production capacity ahead of the growth of the market. And fundamentally, against the advice of the Japanese government at the time, they decided they would design their own car rather than build a license, or get a license for a design as all the other Japanese car makers did at the time. So, if you're going to design your own car from scratch, and you're not going to borrow money from the bank, and you don't have a huge market, you have a potentially growing market, but a small market, you cannot design cars in the traditional way that they were designed in an environment where you had lots of money and a big market and lots of capital. So they had to find a very different, more effective way of developing their own car. And because they knew they were behind in car technology, they also had to design a product development system that could design the next iteration very quickly so they could actually learn. Because they realized, quite correctly, that the Japanese government at some point was going to open the market and they'll face competition from abroad. So they had to build a product development system that could design cars more quickly with less resources, and that they could redesign them on a much faster schedule. So every 4 years rather than every 8 years. So that's interesting. They had to design a product development system to learn to improve their designs at a faster rate in order to catch up, and then later on to exceed the competitors. So the building of the fast replenishment cycle was part of the original concept. So it started with product, and yet we constantly think of Toyota as a more efficient production system. Of course, the decision to build their own product and to try and build not only a product they could replace more quickly, but build a range of products in a small market, meant that the production system had to completely change as well. So Ono had to build a production system in which, without huge capital assets, he could find an alternative way of eliminating all of the excess costs of such a system into a just-in-time flow system. That was a just-in-time flow system that could incorporate a wide variety, a growing variety of products, and that could learn quickly because, again, they knew their efficiencies were going to have to compete with the open market once the Japanese market opened up. So they designed a product development system. That was the purpose of the enterprise. And then a production system to be able to make those products on an increasing frequency with a growing product range in order to learn to compete when the market opened up. So actually, we've been focused on Toyota's static efficiencies, operational efficiencies, whereas in fact Toyota was always really focused on the dynamic efficiencies from learning how to improve the product development system and the production system more rapidly, initially to catch up, but later on discovered that in fact this would outstrip the competitors that they were then exposed to. So interesting. Learning was part of Toyota's original purpose. And we forget that at our peril. And I think it's just helpful to go back to recognize that. Now, once they had built that learning system, then, of course, and they went to the States, and the first designs failed terribly in the States, and they had to go back quickly and learn, and several iterations later, they came up with a small car that was both competitive in terms of cost, but also then in terms of quality. So gradually over time, that faster learning system, production and product development system together, enabled them to grow to become the largest car maker in the world. But long before that happened, Eiji Toyoda actually, I think it was about 1990 and 1991, he had the insight that we had to find an alternative to the internal combustion engine. And he launched a program to start research on 5 alternative types of power plants The initial one was the hybrid, and they've explored all of the others, including hydrogen, which is the latest one they're exploring. So they decided that the market, the environment, and hence the market, would need this technology to be explored. And I remember being in Bosch with the Bosch production system heads when they got the first Prius prototype from Japan. And Bosch, of course, was absolutely committed to diesel engine technology and dismissed it and said this hybrid stuff is a nonsense. 6 months later, they had the largest hybrid research program in Europe. And the times, as you know, these things are now changing enormously. What you probably don't realize is the significance of the hybrid vehicle was actually not the physical technology. It was actually the information technology that was enabled the engines to switch, the batteries and so on. So actually the numbers of lines of code in a hybrid vehicle actually are higher than in a jet fighter. So this was an innovation not only in power plants, but actually an innovation in IT and in software as well. And it's interesting that it's the software that Toyota has been selling to others to make their hybrid engines work. And of course, they have gone through iterations, have managed to make the technology for hybrids economic. But essentially, initially, it was there as an experiment. It was this is where we intend to go. We will gradually, through our superior learning system, our cumulative Kaizen, we will learn how to make this work, because that's what the market needs. That's completely different to thinking, I'm the king of diesel technology, we will make diesel technology work. And look where that's got Volkswagen. So, interesting, Toyota hasn't stopped there. If you look at Toyota's current research into the global platform architecture, I think it's called, their ambitions are to fundamentally rethink both the product development process, to reduce the amount of effort required in product development, to reduce the cost of introducing a new model, to dramatically compress the size of the assembly operation, to make it much more modular so you can produce more volume on the more models on the same line and so on. It's a dramatic incremental process of totally rethinking the product and process that's underway at Toyota right now. And if you look at their website, their other ambition from the needs of society is that the car is increasingly part of an integrated mobility system. Particularly with smart cities and so on in the future, Toyota intends to be one of the leaders in developing mobility systems in the future. So out of the cumulative learning capabilities, they built not only a superior product and product development and production system, but they also built a learning system to enable them to determine which challenges to face in the future and to work out how to do it faster than others. So I think it's very worthwhile to go back and just reflect on the strategy that Toyota has adopted to develop the capabilities to execute the strategy. Lean was right at the core of a customer-first strategy. So it essentially reveals the power of cumulative Kaizen. I was in Toyota's engine plant in Desai the other day, watching the assembly line, which has now been running for 20 years. They can make 20 different types of engines, hybrid, diesel, petrol, on the same line. And through cumulative, iterative experimentation, they are learning how to do that. So, Lean, we've been on a long journey. We started out with the principles, which we wrote up in the book. We've explored the tools. We recognized the tools didn't work in isolation. It needed a management system to support it. We then went to think about what is the change process. And we came up with some thoughts about the questions to ask in thinking about transforming an organization, but actually what we've really learned is that the core of Lean is actually building a learning system. And that's a learning system for a different definition of strategy that Michael was talking about. So we've been on a long journey of discovery, digging deeper, unpeeling the layers of the onion to understand the true significance of Lean. Now, the software world has followed what apparently is a similar path. But I say apparently. The software world grew up with two challenges. The first challenge was how to improve the quality of software design. And extreme programming, XP, was one of the initial attempts to develop the capacity to move away from craft software design to shared software design, to standardizing software design, to develop standardized, higher quality, with less defects and less issues, software. It was very popular for a while, but the popularity has disappeared again. So actually I think they've somewhat lost the plot on the quality of software. It's coming back, but I'll explain that in a minute. But the Agile movement, which I'm sure you've all heard about, and the Agile movement was there as a response to the frustration with the existing waterfall development process, which was, of course, never delivering projects on time because each of the elements, lumpy elements, big batches of work, unpredictable completion dates, lots of variation, lots of slippages cumulatively through the process. Their response was to carve out space for the software guys to develop their own production system, their own software development system, outside without management control. It's a bit like the dream of the Swedes many years ago to create autonomous work cells and have a team assemble a single car as a team in 8 hours. Volvo tried this many years ago. It was never going to be competitive with Lean. So actually the Agile guys were trying to solve essentially the wrong problem. Because Toyota had solved the waterfall problem many years ago in their product development process, breaking the work into small increments, developing the capacity to respond quickly when those increments were not fulfilling what they needed to, synchronizing the whole process through an obeyer, etc. The waterfall problem isn't the waterfall problem. The waterfall problem is the management problem. So Agile was actually trying to solve, in a traditional organization, solve a problem that Toyota had actually already solved. So we had Agile, we have Scrum, we have breaking the work into small increments of time, and we have a lot of interesting innovations in the Agile and Scrum world, which kind of work on their own, there's no question about it, but actually are all about trying to optimize the work within the IT function to improve the software development process itself. And frankly, it's kind of interesting, but it's limited to the software world. And these principles, unless they break out of the software world, back upstream to the users and downstream to the users again, unless they're integrated with the users, I think you're going to see a very limited benefits from it. So I think the software world and the Agile world apparently look like Lean, and no question that some of these things work. But I don't think they really fully understand actually the potential of the Lean product development process. So they're similar, but they're different. And there are, I think, 3 interesting things that the digital world makes us reflect on. First of all, and don't get me wrong, I'm I'm not against the agile, Scrum, Kanban world. It's just that I don't see the pieces adding up to the way that a lean product development process would. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So meaningful work, I think we can learn some very interesting lessons from the software world. At the last IT summit, Regis Medina, I think his name is, made an outstanding presentation, truly outstanding presentation, and in a sense, it was obvious as soon as you listened to it. And he equated Google's focus on developing smart creatives with Lean's focus on engaging everybody in problem solving and in deepening their understanding of their own work. So actually, Google is simply doing what we think Lean folks need to be doing right across the organization. So Lean is essentially another way of, in a structured way, developing our own smart creatives, not just out of the high flyers, but out of everybody. And it's about learning from the work, about the work, to improve the work. And I think one of the fundamental differences between Lean and all of the other improvement methodologies is that Lean is not just about training experts to go and do or to design systems for others to do. It's about engaging people at the process themselves, everybody in the process, in learning how to improve the process. So in a sense, it's harnessing the capabilities of 85, 90% of the employees, maybe 100% of the employees, in improvement in this cumulative improvement, Kaizen improvement, versus relying on 10, 15% of your staff to make all of the improvements. And I think Google's kind of got that and made that a key strategy of theirs, particularly hiring the best smart creatives. We can grow smart creatives. And a great example is this Joy Inc. book. I don't know if any of you have read it, which is about Menlo Innovations in the States, a software development house, a product development house, that is combining lean product development, XP, which was also heavily inspired by Ono, which is about creating paired programming to develop standardized, group-developed software and tracking errors and issues very quickly. It's developing a culture to integrate the whole software process and the development process, and in particular, develop the capabilities of the staff. So I think Joy Inc. is really one of the interesting places where people are really truly bringing the lessons of software and smart creatives together with a lean product development process. The challenge, of course, Menlo is only something like 200 people. It's a really, really interesting example. But it's 200 people. And the big challenge, of course, for us, most organizations we work in are bigger than that, is how do you scale that up? One of the examples I've looked at last year, and been quite inspired by, to be honest, is Spotify in Denmark, in Sweden, in Stockholm. And they have, out of their own needs, developed a structured way of building the organization as a collection of teams. A collection of teams using Scrum and Agile and all of those, and many of those things. And each team, the members of the team, they're members of the team, obviously, but within the team, each member is also a member of their technical specialty. So they're a member of their chapter of their particular technical specialty. So there's a focus on developing the technical competence of all of the team members. Also, the team contains what they call an agile coach, which is the person who organizes the team activities and the management of the Scrum process and the collaboration with other teams and so on. So actually manages the process. So it's the process lead. And the third key person in the team is the product owner, who is actually the, if you like, the voice of the customer, and is the ability to focus the team exactly on the needs of the customer, whether it's in the direct customer or the ultimate customer. So you have 3 dimensions in that team. You have the technical depth, you have the process capability, and you have the product and customer voice. And that's replicated from the individual teams. At the next level up, you'll find the same 3 skills and the same level up. And there's a technical lead at the top of the company, there's a agile lead, and there's a product lead. Now that strikes me as being a very interesting way of building a team-based structure focused on product, focused on developing process skills and developing technical skills. Building on Toyota's T-learning, which is essentially about deepening technical skills and in building horizontal process skills. So I think we are going to see other experiments like Spotify. And I know there are several banks now beginning to look at Spotify as an example for organizing their back offices, and I think that would be a big improvement on what they currently have. So Spotify, great example, really interesting, but I went there, had a really interesting discussion, and the one thing they have not focused on is the actual learning process itself. And so actually they have not developed a process for capturing. They do a lot of plan do. They don't do an awful lot of check. They do some check, but they certainly don't do enough reflect, and they certainly don't build this as a learning system. So, and they've also done this within the tech function. They haven't yet spread this right across the organization. So there's still lots to learn. The other aspect, 2 more aspects and then I'm done, is on technology. It's very interesting that in the digital world, I think our notion of the architecture of technology is fundamentally going to change. It's going to change from big systems, big batch, big leap, to small incremental technical improvements. You can see this in Amazon. They have developed their software based on called software architecture, as a service-oriented architecture, which is totally modular. So instead of big batch releases, they can actually incorporate test. They can do everything in a small module and improve it day by day. So they're actually into releasing thousands of improvements a day. So incremental improvements is the first lesson from technology. The second is that the product and process development process itself is actually becoming a continuous process. So product development is looking more like product production. And the third is that big data and so on gives us all kinds of new opportunities for collaboration with customers to define user needs. Now I won't go into that. Let me just make one final point. This is from the IT summit in Paris. This is Toyota's taking the Toyota House and the Toyota Way system and breaking this down into a set of principles for designing software in Toyota based upon translating the Toyota House into IT. And that, I think, is key to understanding the core of Lean, which is the learning journey that we all, and particular leaders, need to go through. The hardest thing to get leaders to do is to go to the Gemba to really actually understand the problem. Understand the user's problem, understand the gaps that we need to close, and understand the provider's problem at the Gemba. So that's the first step we need to overcome, is actually to learn that we can only see these things by going to the Gemba. The second is actually then going back to something we've, I think, lost sight of, which is the original Toyota House, which is the original interlocking set of principles, ways of thinking about the design of any process. And I think it's not just a production process, I think it's the design of any process. The design of the product development system, very much the same. And that is the frame, the set of questions we would ask of any problem in beginning to try and find solutions to it. And the third then is what we're familiar with, which is all kinds of different problem-solving processes to solve different kinds of problems. And Art Smalley is currently writing a book that will put some more flesh on that bones. We know about A3, we're probably less familiar with other forms of problem solving. And then finally, the final lesson is actually for senior management to go away and reflect on the results of the experiments and the improvements and the learning so far to define the next gaps and the next set of questions. So, the lean contribution, I think, is really quite fundamental in terms of thinking about the future. It's about simpler and smarter solutions. It's about using less capital and materials and less environmental impact. It's about making things better by thinking back from users, which is easy to say, but actually fundamentally difficult to do, but has been at the heart of Toyota's strategy. And it's about building social organizations in which we create meaningful work by challenging and learning by helping others, and by building better decision making through using what Toyota calls management by science as opposed to scientific management, which actually wasn't very scientific. And the end result is that we build adaptive and innovative organizations which can achieve, through cumulative Kaizen, far more than any traditional organization can. So that, I think, is the lean contribution, and that, I think, is the way, some of the things you should think about in improving, in taking your lean journey to the next step. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Fantastic talk. Thank you. Before I let you off, I have a tough one for you. I have an audience of lean guys. What would be the one thing to integrate digital in their work? What is the meditation takeaway for these guys to think about in their job? Je viens de poser la question à Dan pour vous. Enfin, s'il y avait un point sur intégrer cet univers digital dans votre travail en ligne, quel serait le point à méditer?
I think the way of making sense of the hype about technology and making sense of what we can do to realistically change is being able to think through what the purpose is. What is the real result for the customer or for the organization that this technical opportunity might bring? At the moment, we think the technology, we've got to use the technology. Sometimes we think we've got to apply lean. No, what is the problem we're trying to solve for the user? And what is the gap we're trying to close as an organization? If we're clear about those things, then we can be much clearer about the contribution that a technical solution might make, or the contribution, which we've seen many times in the lean world, of designing a manual solution first before automating it. Because in many cases, we can achieve exactly the same result manually at the same time as changing the way people think, which is actually the purpose of what we're doing. So changing the way people think is fundamental to then making intelligent use of the technology. So defining purpose first.
Very deep. Questions for Dan? Des questions pour Dan? On a le temps pour quelques questions? Question from Paul?
Yes. In fact, you're speaking a little bit of a Game of Thrones inside of the company. Where do you start to break down those little territory wars within a company?
It depends. It has to depend. Because it depends on the openness and it depends on the challenge from outside. It depends on whether top management recognize that challenge, and depends on whether there's a real willingness to engage. If there's a potential for the top management to get it, then creating lots of examples is the one thing. And I was in a company just recently at their award ceremony, and they had great examples from production, from product development, from distribution, from all of the pieces of the business. Top management still didn't get it, but they had examples everywhere. And they just need to actually put those examples together and probably change top management. And then you had something. The danger was that the people who had built these pilots were going to get so frustrated they were going to leave. And I think that's what's going to happen, and that will be a great shame. So it needs the missing link is the top management seeing this as a strategy for taking them to a new place. And this was a hardware company, successful French company, making a good living, big profit margins, wanting to go into a completely new digital market. Completely unprepared for a very different way of designing, a different way of operating. And yet they had all the elements potentially there to do so. So I'm increasingly of the opinion that the real problem is headquarters.
Wonderful.
I was in a big multinational, not a French multinational, and I jokingly said to the team I was working with at the top, what would happen if we closed headquarters? As a joke. And they said, actually we know. Last summer, in July, when headquarters was almost empty, we had a major crisis in the company, and it was solved. Nobody had to come back from holiday. It was solved itself. So actually, subsequently, they cut headquarters by a third. And now, I won't tell you the business, but now the business is even more trouble, so I suspect they'll be cutting it by a third again. The most expensive mudas at headquarters.
Can we apply this to governments?
Okay.
Fantastic.
I'm free.